going to share my screen with you and welcome you to this first of 2021 EOCCS Community Online Course Certification System webinar. And it's a subject, I think, that is very close to a lot of our hearts in business education, and that is that connection with practice, actually giving our students the opportunity to do things in the real world, even though they might be in a classroom or, as we're now in, a virtual world. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. What I'm doing now is outlining this. For those who don't know me, I'm Keith Pond, the director of EOCCS, the certification system, and this is part of this community, to which you're all welcome, of sharing the good practice that we find as we go around the world looking at business schools and their digital offerings. Today we have two panelists, Peter Patashko from Cambio Consultancy and CapSource, and he will explain exactly what those things are when he comes on screen, and Dr. Renny van der Eyck of Erasmus, and representing a digital product provider, Organic, based in Rotterdam. They're going to present a couple of or a few minutes of introducing what they're talking about and their take on this whole area, and then we open up for questions. Very much the way we'd like this to happen, I'll come on to questions in a minute, is to use the chat. But you may have noticed, top left-hand corner of your screen there, it says you're being recorded. This webinar will be recorded just in case there's people who are registered who want to see it, and we will keep it. It won't go on YouTube, but we'll be putting it in our repository so that people can access it. If you don't want your contribution, if you do get to speak, if you don't want that contribution used, please let us know, and we can do something about that. For questions, if questions occur to you during the panelists' presentations, please put them in the chat. And how we want to handle those is Teresa will look at those questions and she will invite you to open your microphone and ask your question. And we'll take sort of first come, first served, but we'll look at those and make sure we keep the discussion going in that way. So until you are invited, please keep your microphone muted so that we don't get any extraneous noises coming through. I had a colleague earlier on today whose dogs in the background went mad because the window cleaner had arrived. And that it was quite amusing. And I would invite you, please, to keep your cameras on. We'd love to see you all.
Olha, desculpa lá.
Thing about cameras is if you want to see the panelists and the speakers, if you go to the top right of your screen, then you should just get the speaker view. So you can toggle between gallery view, which is everybody, and speaker view, which is just the person who's speaking. So we should get a good view of that. Here are I'm an academic. Why wouldn't I have intended outcomes for an event? And so we're going to be looking at these, everything to do with the real world in the classroom, consultancy projects, internships, projects, and corporate interactions that Peter and Renee are going to describe to us, and thinking about the students, the management of that, the way in which we can perhaps generate a network of business partners and cases, and is it worth doing? Is it actually improving the learning of our students? So that's enough from me for now. I see. We've got a nice lot of faces there. It's excellent to see so many people turning up. I want to introduce to you our first presenter, Peter Patashko. Peter, I'm going to invite you to share your screen, introduce yourself, and for everyone, if they just want to see Peter, then use the speaker view when that happens. Peter, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Keith. Very kind introduction. Thank you to the whole of the EOCCS online community for having me here today. It's a great turnout, and I appreciate that at a time when we're all spending much of our time online, every hour really counts. So thank you for spending part of that hour with me and with the panel. And thank you to EFMD for hosting us as well. I'm going to get straight into things because the value of these webinars is absolutely in the conversation and the networking that they create, rather than the length of the presentations. So I'm going to jump into that presentation straight away. So bear with me while I quickly share my screen with you. So you should now, as Keith has indicated, be able to see my screen, but you can toggle between me and the screen in various different sizes as we go through the presentation. I'm going to start by introducing the two hats that I'm wearing today, and then of course move into I think a really helpful case study for us to be discussing. So these are my contact details. We'll send you the presentations, of course, afterwards, so you've got all of this information on record. So who am I? So my name is Peter Patashko. I work for an organization called Cambio. It's a private consultancy that I founded 2 years ago, focused on social change. And I've worked with a variety of clients over that period. I'm very lucky to have worked with some wonderful universities here in the UK, where I'm based, but also all over the world, as well as some private corporate clients and the UN and others. What we do is we focus on the subject matters of enterprise and culture change. I hold a range of leadership positions in and around the social enterprise space, where I've been working for around 15 years, latterly as the director of the International Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, a network of incubators and accelerators based around the world, and connections with Unlimited, which is the UK Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs. So I've been lucky enough to work in over 30 countries, many of whom I know are represented on the call today. And the work we do focuses on three things. One is coaching of entrepreneurs, particularly social entrepreneurs, one-to-one. Secondly, capacity building and developing connections with networks like this network to spread hopefully good practice and new ideas. And thirdly, change management through leadership. And that is what I would call a corporate lens, really. I work with organizations like HSBC and Bupa to help them manage periods of change and look at social entrepreneurship in their companies through often the lens of leadership programs. So a bit about me. What's the link with CapSource? So I represent CapSource. It's an international network founded in the US around about 5 years ago. And what we do is we make experiential learning easy, make it simple. Link to the website here. I'm going to talk you through the model, okay? So what we do and how we do it, and I'm going to give you an example as well. So we match educators and industry partners together so that everybody wins. It's about collaboration, recognizing that universities have things they're good at, that industry, small enterprise and corporates have things they're good at. Why can we not bring all that together? That's the fundamental core of it. In terms of what it looks like, the range varies, but it's often up to 2 to 2.5 months. So short bursts of activity based on a specific topic, industry, location, and size. Increasingly, of course, this is happening online, and we'll get onto that. The modality, often online now, but it can be blended. Of course, it can be in person. This started in the US, as I said, and it's spreading now all over the world. We think there's a real opportunity here in Europe. What formats do we have for this? Okay, so there's really two main formats for that, and this is the terminology we use, some of which will be familiar to you, I think. Live cases, okay, so large class collaborations or indeed competitions. This could be anything from a small group, a seminar group, all the way through to a full lecture of perhaps up to 200 students. A project or multiple projects requiring a faculty facilitator to take you through those. Alternatively, a capstone project. So that is what you traditionally call a small team consulting project, ideal for a handful of students, again, a kind of seminar style group, where students are working intensively in the business rather than on the business, which is something that the live case really would focus on. So they're the two kind of core options. And you can see the sort of shape of those and the pricing that we structure those on currently. So it's very accessible. The process is 4 steps. It's simple. An initial request is made from the institution, sometimes from the individual business partner, comes both ways. What's the focus of the teaching? What's the timeline? What are the requirements on the company side? The matching process, which is something that CapSource does, we take that out of your hands. You meet as a university with those qualified companies to assess the interest. We shape that for you, we set that up. The design is done, we facilitate that between those industry partners and the learning experience at the university, and the product is launched. Yeah, so the collaboration is finalized. So we walk you through those 4 steps. You just need to participate and take part in that and have that need. Where are we now? So you can see from the logos in the background, we work at many institutions across the United States with over 130 individual collaborations across those universities. We work with the lead educator in each case. We're working currently with over 2,500 students and over 300 companies. So we're scaling quickly, and we've proven the value in the States, but we'd like to be able to do that here in Europe too. What are we trying to do? What's the purpose of this? We're solving, or we're contributing towards solving the skills gap, which you'll be all too familiar with. As you will know, only 1 out of 3 university level students expect to graduate themselves with the knowledge and skills they need to be successful in an ever-changing workplace. We've seen more change in the last 12 months than we have in the previous decade. So that is only going to be exacerbated further. You can see here some statistics and quotes from business leaders. I'm not going to rub those in. We all know those are out there. It's a question of what can we do about it, and we think CapSource is a great solution to finding and employing those 21st century skills, the confidence gap that our students need to be successful, whatever they choose to do with their life. Okay, this is one case study example that I gave. It's a small consulting project through the host company. So the host company is called CoinSource. You can see there. The student challenge, and this is literally a screenshot from one of the conversations. Oregon Tech is the institution. The challenge is simply, how could CoinSource go to market with a new business-to-business offering? So in terms of the students, they're virtually collaborating, as you can see there, with the industry partner. You can see the director of sales and marketing in the top left-hand corner. And the result is ultimately a strategy. And it's also a full-time paid internship for this student group. This is one of those capstone consulting groups. It's 6 or 7 students on the screen there. It's a win-win. It's a win for the company. They're getting great expertise, talent, knowledge, energy, and it's a win for the students. They're getting experience that they would otherwise not get until they'd already certainly entered the workplace. And we can be really creative, of course, in this online environment, as you can see working there. And then just to finish up, really, what's the exchange between the student and company? If we can really boil that down. So, of course, students are applying the theory that they're getting at university directly into practice. It's real projects, it matters. They've got skin in the game. It's genuine skills development and, of course, professional networking. So networking with companies and individuals that they may choose to work with full-time in the future. Of course, it's reference-worthy experience as well. From a company point of view, it's fresh ideas, it's cost-effective solutions, of course, especially at a really challenging time for budgets everywhere. It's training and it's onboarding new talent. It's great brand exposure for them. And of course, it enables them to look at their runway in terms of which of these students might they bring into the business in the long term. So I've just given you a very, very quick flavor, because I'm conscious of time, of what we can do. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. I would invite those at the relevant point. Contact details are again here if you want to know more. It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to those questions when we get there. I'll hand back over to you, Keith.
Thank you very, very much, Peter. And just keep your mic open and answer. I understand it's only very recently that this sort of project that was happening face-to-face has gone completely virtual because of current circumstances. So perhaps there'll be some questions about how that went and how that works virtually, because obviously that's what this community is very interested in.
Very happy to.
Thank you. René van der Eyck from Erasmus Business School. And this is a school, like many, have had these traditional case studies and consultancy projects. René, I wonder if you can share with us your take on this area and how we bring the real world into the virtual classroom.
Thank you, Keith, for your kind introduction. I will share with you, I'll attempt to share with you my screen, see if that works out. And if everything goes according to plan, you should now be able to see my presentation on your screen.
Indeed, it's there.
Okay. Well, I was some time ago, Keith, you approached me and shared with me the topic that you wanted to discuss, and I was quite interested. You, especially because real interaction is something I'm quite passionate about, something that Erasmus University focuses on as well. And I think we have ample experience in doing this, so I'm quite happy to share with you some of the learnings, some of our key learnings. Well, most of you have probably gotten a feel for learning. You're probably teachers and faculty yourselves. This is one of those quotes that keeps surfing and resurfing time and again. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I may learn. And especially the latter part, involve me and I learn. I think that's very fits quite well with the topic that we're discussing today. So it's experiential learning. And it's actually something that I have in my sort of career as a teacher found to be quite true. So my name is René van der Rijk. I have done my PhD at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I do some teaching in the field of innovation, which is a topic that is quite in demand. So there's a lot of teaching there, but I also coach student consultancy projects, which I do every year, and I very much enjoy doing that. And so today, I think gives us to share some of that, some of those insights that we have gotten over time. So there's a limited time, so no doubt Keith will keep me sharp when it comes to time management. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the logistics. How do we do that? What was the sort of the impact of COVID-19? So how these courses structured? What are some of the topics that we tackle? We use and we have implemented over time some tooling. So we make use of EDA simulation, which is focusing around focuses on international teamwork. We make use of an app to facilitate team interaction, teamwork, team dynamics, which is the Team Insights app. And then I will sort of wrap up with the teacher perspective, my perspective on what I think students are taking away from that. And I think there's a lot of that will match with what Peter has already shared with you guys on what students are taking away from it. All right, so Erasmus University has been doing these projects since 2000, so we have had a lot of experience doing these. We typically do 30 to 40 of these projects on a yearly basis. We source internally, so CapSource obviously offers a service for you to find these companies, but Erasmus University personally has done so via an internal department called the Career Center. So when we get started in January, so typically the Career Service Center starts to recruit these companies, say somewhere in October, and that goes on to say December. So if you look at current repeat customers or companies that are so enthused with the results, it's about 50-50. So we have a lot of repeat companies, repeat players, if you will. I would think that most of the companies, if not all of them, are satisfied with the result. But obviously, some companies are quite small, so they don't have a whole host of projects they can do on a yearly basis. They pay a small fee for participation. Obviously, the goal is not there's not a monetary benefit is not the goal, but it's important to get buy-in and also to have that perception of value. So we do want to, so if people pay for participation, there's at least the idea that it's worth something. It's not worthless. It's important, and it helps in the participation throughout the process. So we do this on a yearly basis, and then so last year, March, the COVID-19 measures started to affect our teaching, and so that meant a shift from in-person to online meetups. Luckily, it showed that the transition going from online from in-person to online worked actually quite well. So there's a lot of upsides. That's not to say there weren't any drawbacks. Students obviously were struggling on some aspect, some level. Obviously, the fact that there was no real life interaction with the company was disappointing to some of the students, because that's very often one of the reasons why students are so enthused about participating in these consultancy projects, is because it gives them an opportunity to interact with the company in an in-person setting. Team collaboration, it worked out quite well, but in some instances it became more challenging, because obviously it's more difficult now to confront students who are maybe slacking and not pulling their weight. So sometimes that became sort of more of a challenge for teams. And obviously maintaining that company connection and interaction sometimes was made more difficult by the fact that there was obviously no in-person involvement. I would think that for most of the project that wasn't a problem, but for some that turned out to be huge. Positive learnings, surprisingly, data collection online via Teams or Zoom or whatever worked very well. So in that regards, I'm completely on board with Peter's conclusion that doing these projects online works out quite well. Student collaboration, even when students worked from the respective home countries, worked out quite well, with the caveat, and I've just discussed it, that some of the projects where students were maybe struggling a little bit more did find it more difficult to manage their team interaction. Online project coaching worked also quite well. So I taught and I coached a lot of these projects, and online didn't turn out to be a big problem. So what does that course look like? So obviously, it is a couple of months. Typically, we start off beginning of February and we wrap up in June. Assessment is done via a slide doc. The report is presented by the students in the form of slide doc. There's a final presentation both at the Erasmus University and the company and the company's offices, and there's an individual reflection report. It's a master level program, at least for the Erasmus University, and then there's a number of steps that make out the course. So obviously there's an introduction with kickoff, and students are sort of introduced into the teams. We have a number of guest lectures. An important part of what we do is the EDU simulation. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but students are asked to participate, and in the end they need to present, to draft, and come up with a team charter. There's a number of sessions. Obviously, the first introductory session or briefing at the company side is very important to get students involved. And it offers companies an opportunity, it offers companies the opportunity to make their case and present the challenge that students will be working on. Obviously, we need to monitor team behavior, because we have a lot of those teams, and we need to make sure that we're quite in tune which team's doing well and which might not be doing so well. They need to hand in an executive summary. Then there's a final internal competition, and obviously then they need to wrap up with the survey and reflection paper. And obviously at the end there's a mandatory evaluation assessment. Don't spend too much time on the on the format itself. If you have any questions on that, do get in touch. But this is basically how we do it. Now, what's important is that because we've been doing this for such a long time, we have found that there's a need to strengthen some of the weaknesses of the program. So what's very important is that students have no prior experience. So what you typically find is that when they start off, they have no idea what it is to work with, what it is to be working with the company. So we've introduced an EDU simulation, which speeds up the learning curve, and which tackles some of the sort of main challenges and difficulties of doing these projects. So if you do these, it's almost like sort of a Groundhog Day, right? So if you do these on a continual basis, you get confronted with the same problems and difficulties over and over again. And what we've tried to do is create a simulation, about an hour, to then tackle all of these topics so as to prepare them for what's to come. So what does that look like? Students are asked to plan a group project together. So there's a lot of planning involved. It takes about an hour. Students are then asked to plan that project, and as they are involved in planning the project, these events are injected into the flow, and they represent actual difficulties and learnings. And I'll share with you some examples of what these difficulties and learnings are that students are then asked to grapple with. That obviously interferes with the challenge that they have in coming up with that overall planning. So students learn that not everyone comes into the project with the same set of expectations and goals. This is actually one of the main difficulties that students grapple with as they're doing these projects, right? Not everyone is aiming for the same sort of grade. Not everyone wants the same result, and to bring all of that together is quite challenging for students. And then again, this is followed up with a real output. So they need to draft a team charter. Most of you are aware of what the team charter is, but they are asked to then find the output as well as the resources that they will put into it to turn this project into a success. What can they expect from one another? So what does that setup look like? Obviously, you need to set up the room. There's an explanation video that explains how that works out. They get a little bit of time to prepare, and then the EOCCS simulation starts. They have about an hour to do that. They get 5 minutes to wrap up at the end. So what are some of the main learnings? What are they taking away from that? How could they have done better? And then very importantly, then the teacher wraps up with a 30-minute mini lecture where he or she then connects the experience that students have harnessed throughout doing the simulation with theory and real life examples. Now, doing the simulation is really important, but we always stress it's important to have that wrap up at the end. So what are some of the topics? I promised that I would share with you some of the topics that we tackle at the beginning of the course in the EOCCS simulation. Plagiarism, probably all of you are all too aware that this unfortunately does happen now and again. Things like leadership, how to manage personal goals versus team goals, work-life balance, but also shifting deadlines. We've also had events where the company coach leaves the company while doing the consultancy project. How to deal with that? What about shifting or changing project goals? All of these things that are sort of an integral part of doing these projects are then sort of introduced, and they're asked to think about how they would react, how they would deal with that. So the simulation is meant to give them a sort of a head start, speed of that learning process as they are about to start doing the consultancy project. As they are doing the consultancy project, there is a challenge for both teachers and students, but especially for staff. There's a challenge. So faculty needs to coach, and faculty is asked to coach these projects. They need to manage these students' teams effectively, and in order to do that, they need inside information. They need to know how these teams are doing. That allows us to coach these teams more effectively. So we've developed an app, which is the Teams Insights app, and the Team Insights app provides the faculty with a teacher dashboard, and the dashboards provide a sort of an at-a-glance overview of the different teams and ranks them based on a number of KPIs. So then the faculty is now in position to focus their efforts and time and energies on the teams that seem to be the most in need of assistance. Students also get a benefit. They fill out a weekly mini survey, 3 to 5 questions, takes about 5 minutes. We force them to reflect on how the team is doing. We force them to reflect on team dynamics and performance. But they also are provided with a team sort of student dashboard, and the dashboard provides them with insights on how the team is doing and how some of the team members are doing. And that's very valuable. We found out in practice, because quite often students find it difficult to confront one another. And so they sort of beat around the bush, right? So they don't get to the point. That team sort of struggles on, and no one's actually speaking in his or her mind. And that is detrimental to the performance of the team. Obviously, we've developed it to work with all of the OS systems that are available. It's mobile friendly. Like, we have a dashboard that is accessible both for teachers and students, and that provides the insights for them to then act on as they manage their own teams. All right, so this is sort of the setup. How do we do it? Why do we do it? I want to close with the perspective that I have as a teacher. Why do we do this? Why do we think this is valuable? what I've learned is that it's a very valuable experience for students, and in that sense, I'm completely on board with what Peter has just shared with us. It is very relevant. It provides them with professional confidence. Coming into these projects, usually students have no experience working with companies at all, and so they have no idea what the value is that they bring to the table. And obviously, doing this, working with companies, and being able to see what they're able to do brings value to companies. Very, very relevant. Obviously, professional skills. These students grow tremendously throughout the course. These 3 or 4 months are, in that sense, very beneficial, both for students and the university. Usually, it's typically it's the first work experience, so they have a lot of questions. They're insecure. So what is it like? Do I like the job? Would I like to work here? Some of the students actually end up working at the company, but also there's students who then figure out for themselves, consultancy is just not for me. I don't like this, which is, I think, an as valuable outcome as any, right? If you know what you don't like, you can focus on things that you do like. Teamwork. These projects really center on teamwork. If you're not able to get your act together as a team, you will fail tremendously. You will fail. That this is just a given. And so these students can be very strong students individually, but if they're not able to bring that together into sort of an effective team effort, they won't be successful. And I think that makes this course stand out in a sense, because very much depends on the activities of the team. So it is challenging. It's demanding for the university and for the staff that needs to coach these students. So we have a number of tools available at the Erasmus University to make sure that this is effective. Obviously, we've talked about the EDU simulation that we use at the kickoff of every course. We have the students we ask students to draft the team charter, which is an important method. We have a lot of feedback sessions with students, which is very important to be able to sort of deal with the issues when they're still small and they haven't sort of exploded into something that has become unmanageable. We monitor team dynamics closely via the Team Insights app. We have coaches available 24/7 for students. We offer a range of skill courses, and we have online lectures available and resources available for students as well. And I want to wrap up with something that Keith has asked me to share with you as well. So what are some of the learning outcomes when it comes to doing these projects, and why would we ask students to do this? What we found is that these 3 or 4 months are provide sort of a tremendous growth for students, and the growth can be sort of pinpointed to the skills such as analytical skills, obviously problem-solving skills, managerial. They need to manage the project within the time frame that has allotted to them, leadership skills, and obviously getting socialized into the business. All in all, I'm very enthused when it comes to doing these projects. I know that students enjoy them tremendously, and I would definitely recommend them to you as a viable method of teaching. If you have any questions, and I can imagine that you have them, because obviously I'm limited in time, but if you have questions, do let me know. Thank you.
René, thank you very, very much. And yes, we do have questions. My colleague, Teresa from our Prague office, has been monitoring the chat, and she will ask you to unmute your mic and ask your question. So we're starting with one, I think, from Caroline Ennis. Teresa, over to you.
Teresa, do you want to unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. Sorry for that. Okay. So Caroline, you had 2 very interesting questions to ask. Go ahead, please.
Thank you both, Peter and René. Very interesting work. I work in using simulations in an offline space rather than in a real life space. So very interested in the types of things that you're doing. One of the things that comes up quite a lot in the practical learning space is the opportunity to pick up theory in the process of applying it, but not always realizing it. So I was really interested in what happens within that kind of online space for experiential learning, whether if somebody's asked to think about a strategic intention and a vision for their organization, whether there's a supplementary or not element that is the teacher or advisor. So that was my question number one. And my question number two was to think about the way in which that tool for learning is supporting the assessment process, and whether there's ranking scores that you would be able to see in the learner management space. And one of the ways that those are really useful is not just in the marking process, but in the understanding of the way in which students' engagement supports their development, and hopefully there's a correlation between that and the mark outcome. So it's very kind of detailed. I apologize for that, but I'm really interested in your work.
Yeah, I think well, first question, either of our panelists, Peter, if you'd like to start with that on Caroline's first question about the embedding of theory into the whole process, so the learning can be complete.
Yeah, very happy to, Keith. And I was sort of holding back there because Caroline will know that I've responded in the chat, so I wanted to give Renee a chance to come in. But I'll go very briefly first. I mean, in a sense, the short answer is absolutely that can be done, and some institutions in the States have requested that, absolutely, because of course, as somebody that teaches within a business school environment as well, that wraparound experience is really so important, and the application is what we're looking for. So sometimes those requests will come through, and that is absolutely possible within the technology, within the platform, and the relationship building that's offered. And absolutely having somebody, the kind of glue to hold that together as an advisor within CapSource, that is provided. So there's a touch point for you as the client. And then just quickly, I'll come back on the ranking point. Again, that really depends on if that's what you're looking for and you really want to cascade this across your institution, we can offer that. At the moment, we don't offer a sort of across university ranking, but intra the university, that's absolutely something we could deliver on.
Thanks very much, Peter. Thank you.
Renee, have you got anything to add there?
Well, yeah, I might sort of bring into discussion the Erasmus perspective, which is that our students are given theory lectures and theory infusions throughout the course itself, and I think that's quite similar to what Peter has been talking about. So there's lectures, there is guest lectures, there is online resources, and obviously there's the interaction with the coach. And the coach is then obviously the one who is asked to then interact with the students directly, focusing on the challenge or the project that they are, themselves working with. Obviously, because the theory is quite general in the sense how to do consulting, what are some of the theories that you can bring to bear, how to organize, some of these things that are quite generic. But then the coach is dealing with students on a sort of one-on-one basis with their particular project in mind. So he or she will then be able to connect their practical learnings with theory. And I think I made that point also when I was talking about the EDA simulation. I strongly believe in linking that practical experience with theoretical relevance, because if you don't bridge the two, quite often they sort of diverge and students lose maybe the connection that has been maybe quite apparent, but they just don't make that link, and so then you lose out, I think, on an important learning relevance, learning benefit. And then finally, I think there was that point on ranking. Well, maybe it depends on the institution as well, and I think it's a bit of a Dutch perspective as well, but in the Netherlands they typically don't like the ranking, and so there's a lot of students with the teams, they will all be sort of competing, but there's no actual ranking them next to each other, actually. So we don't do it. We will be able to do it, obviously, because we do have that information, but it's just, I think, a bit of a Dutch thing. We don't like doing it. I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you, Renee. Sorry, thank you, Renee. I really agree with the model for coaching because it helps the journey for students, and I kind of get your idea too on the ranking. Some institutions really want that and others don't, so thank you both very much. Sorry, Teresa.
Thanks for the questions, Caroline.
So there is another question from Ana Lucia Martins for Renee in particular.
All right, so what's the question?
Anna, can you please unmute yourself and ask the questions? Or
yes, I can. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for both of the speakers for the presentations you just gave us. I was particularly interested in René's experience. I thought it was very, very useful. My question here is, how many students are involved in this course per year? What is the volume of work that you have, and are the teachers or supervisors involved, and how is that involvement conducted throughout the semester?
Okay, good point. I think typically we have 2 courses where we do consultancy projects. Typically we have 15 projects per course, which I think then depends on the year, so it can go up to 40, but say anywhere between 30 and 40 projects. And depending on the course, we have an average of 4 or between 4 and 6 students per project. That's I think the variance depends a little bit on the preference of the teacher and maybe the number of students. So between 30 and 40 projects. And then your question was, I think your follow-up question was, how many staff do you need to involve to coach these projects? And that I think goes back to my earlier point. That's also the reason why we introduced the Team Insights app. I think typically we have coaches doing multiple projects, coaching a number of these projects simultaneously. We prefer that actually, because then there's a little bit of cross-fertilization, and they can share some other insights. But yeah, that's typically how we do it. And then we try to unburden the coaches, because they do multiple, they coach multiple teams.
okay, thank you very much, René. There's a lot of questions. Thank you for this. Thank you for being so engaged. I would like to ask Christelle if you could ask your questions, please. Christelle Thoron.
Yes, thank you, Teresa, and thank you, René, for your presentation. So I just had one question. I was very surprised to see that companies are indeed paying a small fee for their participation. So I was wondering how you make it to have such companies paying even a small fee, because I imagine that the added value for companies is somehow not certain, meaning that sometimes perhaps depending on the involvement of students or the quality of their work, perhaps company may be a bit disappointed. So how do you make it to convince companies to pay even a small fee and to renew these types of partnerships from one year to the other? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think probably Peter has also a take on this as well, but I can definitely share the Erasmus perspective. For a long time, as we started doing this since 2000, the projects were actually free, so we didn't charge anything. But then we found that the sort of involvement diminished somewhat, and for some of these projects that actually was held through, and so they are now charging I would think a very small fee of, I think, about €1,000 or whatever. Typically, for the companies that participate, this is small change, right? So this is such a small amount of money, and the potential upside is such a tremendous upside that they are quite happy to participate. Obviously, there are companies that maybe because of the fee decide not to participate, but then generally the Erasmus University is quite happy not to engage with them, because they're basically saying, if you can't afford the €1,000 or whatever you're charging, how important is the project actually to you? How important are the outcomes that we'll be working on? If this is not important to you, if it is not worth €1,000, then I think we might not be on the same page. So this is the reason why. Obviously the money. I mean, the Erasmus University, €1,000 is completely inconsequential, but it's more about the sort of signal that we're sending to these companies. Peter, I think you probably have something to add here as well.
Yeah, thank you, René, and thank you, Crystal, for the question. I think it's a really good question. The model that we operate is slightly different, so we don't charge small businesses for that, and I think that's a nod to the current situation. But there is a threshold at which we would start charging. So where there are bigger industry partners, of course, we would expect them to make a contribution. And I think what René said about sort of skin in the game, as it were, is absolutely right. But given the overall scope of the fee and what we think the balance of contribution and value is, we wouldn't charge a small business for the program, no.
Thank you for your answers.
I might want to add to that in the sense that what we've learned is also that there is also the student perspective. Students very much like to work with the household names. So we've got Shell, Unilever, DSM, AkzoNobel, whatever the bigger companies, and Beiersdorf, you know, but these are companies that they really like working for. I'm just not to say that these projects are more interesting or less interesting than some of the smaller companies that are participating, but typically students love to work with the bigger companies. So yes, so I agree with Peter. You know, money might be an issue for the smaller companies, but students ideally like to work with the bigger firms.
There is another question for both of the speakers from Melinda.
Hi, I'm sorry, my camera has a bug, so you cannot see me. Actually, I already got an answer through the chat, so it was great. My question was about the good practices to share about how to set up such a project. If there are don't-dos or good practices to recommend. And actually, I would also like to ask another question about the engagement of the teaching faculty and the other people in the faculty, like program managers or learning designers, in such projects. So how much time it requires, how much follow-up it requires from the faculty. Thank you.
Peter, you want to maybe bring in some of your insights?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Again, I've perhaps been industrious and already replied ahead to Melinda, which I think is why Melinda indicated that she wanted to add that sort of second part to the question. But just very briefly, so Renee has time to respond. For me, in terms of the kind of key insights, what I've said here is that I think really being clear on the framework and expectations of what that partnership looks like from the outset. In terms of that individual case is really, really important, and building a meaningful relationship with the industry partner. Of course, CapSource is here to help oil the wheels of that, but that genuine relationship and partnership needs to be in place for there to be success over the course of the partnership. And then in terms of your second question, Melinda, I think it's how long is a piece of string, really, because it will very much depend on the scale of intervention you're looking for. Some institutions will come to us actually with a specific ask in terms of a small cohort of MBA students that require one or two specific cases or projects. Other institutions will come to us and say, actually, across their entire business school, we want to work at scale. So it really will depend on the scale you're looking to work at. But of course, we have the option of being able to work with you because we recognize the burden that it has on institutions, that this is a challenging time right now. So we want to be able to take as much of that off you as possible. So unfortunately, the short answer is it just depends on exactly what you're looking for. But the long answer is, of course, we're here to help if that, as we can be useful.
Yeah, to add to the insights that Peter offered, I would think that the course can be very demanding, and I think it is typically quite demanding for students, but that's fine as long as you're very clear about what you require from students and companies. So if from the outset you need to be very clear this, and you need to make it clear to students, this is going to be a course that's going to be very demanding. Just that this is going to be a very demanding course, but with great upside potential, right? So we will ask a lot from you, but we will also offer a lot. And for companies, I think you need to be clear about what's in them for them. So what obviously you have to offer, but also what you require from them. There needs to be engagement, right? They need to interact with the students. They need to take it seriously. And I think you don't, if you start doing the acquisition and start to talking to these companies, you need to, I think, be very clear about what this also takes, or what involvement is required to make this a success from their part as well. And then in terms of the pitfalls, I think I sort of touched upon those in my talk a little bit. Staff involvement. So that's why we introduced the Team Insights app, because for staff that you ask to coach these projects, it can be quite intense. And obviously, speeding up that learning curve, that's been one of the learnings that we've, in the last, 20 years, 20-something years, have sort of come across, is that it's really important to speed up that learning curve at the beginning, because otherwise it's almost like sort of a Groundhog Day experience, where you start re-experiencing the same issues over and over again. Some of them, you just can't avoid, but some of them you can, because they just don't know, right? Because they don't have that experience. And once you do, once you tackle the issues, they're not likely to make the same mistake again. And so, yeah, I would then sort of refer back to some of the topics that I've talked about in my.
If I can just comment here as well, it's one of the things we've all found out in this COVID period is that online interaction with our students is a very different thing to face-to-face interaction. And I think the running of these consultancy projects, it's a number of credits in the student's grade book, but you have to compare it with how much time would you give a normal lecture course for these credits. It's just a different use of your time, and as you say, Renee, quite intensive at some times, and a different way of using your time. But I'm not sure it would be substantially more time than if you were in a lecture course using faculty in that way.
May I respond to that,
Yeah.
Keith? I would think that from a student perspective, again, taking the Erasmus sort of starting point as a base of reference, I would think for them, it's a much more demanding course than maybe some of the average courses, the other courses they're taking, just because now there is, as I think Peter sort of eloquently put it, there's skin in the game. They need to perform because the company is looking for results. And from a teacher perspective, staff perspective, I would agree. It's not necessarily more work, but you do need to implement smart tooling. Otherwise, it can easily require maybe more time, because if you're starting to micromanage these teams and you don't have the tools to get these insights that you need in order to be effective, then I found, in my own experience, that it can be quite time consuming, maybe more so than a typical course. But if you have the right tools, it doesn't necessarily need to take more time.
Okay, we've probably got time, Teresa, for another couple of questions. Do you want to sort of take it from the listing?
Yeah, Stephen Hickman has a question about assessment. Are you still here, Stephen?
Oh, yes, I'm still here.
Good.
Thank you. Great presentations, guys. Thanks for the insights. Renee, my question is for you, and it's really the interest in everything being online now. And so your consultancy project is online. So students are learning and collaborative work online. I just wonder have you got any kind of thoughts on how you assess the skills, the digital skills that they built up, and the digital literacies that they've developed as they're going through this experience?
Well, I think typically students are way ahead of us teachers, in the sense that they use the online collaboration tools quite smoothly. They handle that quite well. I think I was sort of surprised, and I think I mentioned it during my presentation as well, how easily they sort of made that transition from in-person to online. Maybe us teachers struggling more so than the students themselves. Obviously, grading, so sort of from a sort of a grading perspective, I think it became maybe somewhat more difficult as a teacher to sort of assess who's doing what, and what the value added was of the individual students. There's obviously ways of going around that, and to compensate, they need to also hand in individual outputs. And as you do more of these sessions with students, you also get an opportunity to probe individual students to see if they're still on board. And I would definitely recommend all of my fellow teachers to do so, right? To probe these students, and also especially the ones who may be a little bit timid and quiet, because sometimes I found that these students can be the driving force of a project, but you have no idea because they're just not voicing themselves in the sessions. And you have maybe someone who's blathering on and on in the meeting, but he or she is not the driving force. So you need to be careful, I guess, not to draw conclusions too easily.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I guess we still have time for another question, or what do you think, Keith?
Yes, indeed, Teresa. Yes, if there's another one that you're keeping tabs on the list there.
There's more, but let's give the floor to Maria Cristina Soria.
Yes,
Please,
hello.
Maria.
Hi, Teresa. I've got a question for Renee. We were discussing about your experience with one of my faculty members that is online at the moment with you, and we were wondering which the tools you were referring to, the collaborative tools using in your courses. Did you develop them internally at in the Rotterdam School of Management, or they were outsourced to the university?
Good question. It's basically a co-creation project. So it's been a collaborative effort between the Erasmus University and a educational tooling provider based in Rotterdam, Organic. I have sort of a dual position, so I do a lot of teaching and I develop a range of educational tools. And the Erasmus University has been sort of struggling with these topics for quite a while. At some point, they approached me to see if we could come up with something more scalable to deal with these issues. And so we had a lot of staff at the university involved in coming up with, you know, the right questions and formatting and the issues that were prevalent and relevant to them. And then we had the tech guys at Organic developing the tools, but all the content was then provided and infused by the Erasmus University. And I think that made for a relevant and productive collaboration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're actually coming to the end of our allotted time now. I do see there's a number of questions still in the chat, and I think actually there's enough around the area of assessing group work and free riders and elements like this to actually make another discussion about that element. Perhaps we'll do that in the future. I know Peter has put his email in the chat for you to get in touch with him with any specific questions. But can I please take the opportunity to thank our speakers, Peter Patashko and Dr. Renee van der Eyck, for coming along here this afternoon, sharing these very, very interesting ideas. Well, they're more than ideas, practices with us, and of how they've gone into, you know, seamlessly, it seems, into the virtual classroom. And of course, we know that that means that this can be extended and expanded, provided we remember some of the constraints about the types of companies, the types of project, the management span of faculty members for numbers of students, all of these practical things. But it's something I think that could even go, I dare say, international. You know, this is one thing that EFMD is very pleased to promote, is that our business education is international. So whilst you might have local and regional firms at the moment, why not a firm somewhere else in the world as your source material? So thank you very, very much, guys. Thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. I wonder if I can ask you all one last time to look at the gallery view, put your cameras on, and just wave us all goodbye. Thank you very, very much, everyone. See you next time. In March, we have a webinar on virtual reality and augmented reality. And I hope if you're interested there, you can make it to that one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.